So tell us a little bit about how Light on Anxiety treats OCD and related conditions.
We at Light on Anxiety use the ERP model for treatment. So that's exposure and response prevention, or exposure and ritual prevention. It's really exposing you to your fear, but in gradual steps with your therapist, so that you can overcome that fear and it doesn't continue to bother you in the ways that it currently does.
And what's a clinical example of how you use ERP with a client?
So with a client with, let's say, contamination OCD, it's a very common form of OCD where things feel contaminated around you. With your therapist, so if I was your therapist, I would do those kinds of exposures with you. So an exposure would be, let's say you felt like the things on the table in front of you were contaminated in some way because other people touched them, and you're not sure who touched them, so there's a lot of question marks around it. As your therapist, I would grab one of the toys with you, and you would grab one, and we would get kind of contaminated in a way and feel your anxiety kind of go up, but tolerate it and learn how to tolerate it. Your therapist would help you do some breathing and do some other kinds of thought replacement that you can kind of get through your exposure, and you would see that you can do it. So you'd put the toy back, you would let that anxiety simmer, and you'd feel it, and then it would kind of gradually go down without doing a compulsion. So let's say you always wash your hands after something like that. You wouldn't wash your hands immediately after, and you'd see that anxiety gradually go down. So that's the goal.
And can you give another example? We sometimes have visitors to our website that are looking for help with intrusive thought OCD or harm OCD. So any tips for using ERP for that kind of OCD?
Yeah, so intrusive thought OCD is very common. It's very common, and what tends to happen with this individual is that they'll have a thought that they're afraid to do something bad or harm someone in some way. So if you had a fear, for example, of harming your wife, this is a great fear of yours, the thought comes up every single day, and it really, really makes you anxious and makes you really upset. In session, we would come up with different kinds of exposures where your therapist would guide you through a moment, a thought of potentially something like, repeat that you'll harm your wife over and over again. Now that sounds scary, but the reason is because we're trying to acclimate you to those words so that you can regain your power from them, and so that they're not that powerful, because words are words, right? Thoughts are thoughts. It doesn't really mean anything about you that you have a thought like that. So we can kind of regain our power from them by talking about them and exposing ourselves to them.
And last question, any top tip for someone who's experiencing OCD symptoms, struggling with OCD, that might be helpful?
I like to say something that my supervisor, Dr. Kissen, says is, an exposure a day keeps the doctor away. So if there is something that kind of constantly bothers you, then kind of play that scenario out a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean that you're letting it win. That just means that you are not letting it haunt you. So if you, every morning, let's say you have some kind of contamination fear, right, then use your toothbrush in a different way, or do something in a different order that would make you feel uncomfortable. Now, the more you're doing those, you're regaining your life back from OCD. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much.